My wife walked out, but her mother's visit changed my life. Before this story begins, let me say something important. If you believe love always ends with shouting, if you think betrayal always comes with slammed doors, if you think heartbreak is loud, you're wrong. Sometimes heartbreak whispers, and those whispers can destroy you faster than screams ever could. So before we go any further, subscribe to this channel, because the stories shared here aren't just entertainment, they're mirrors, and one day you might see yourself in one of them. Now listen carefully, because what I'm about to tell you started with my wife leaving me, but it didn't end the way anyone, especially me, could have imagined. The night my marriage ended, the house didn't feel empty at first. Felt wrong, like something essential had been removed, but the space it occupied still lingered in the air. I was sitting on the couch, unmoving, watching shadows crawl slowly across the living room walls as the evening light faded. The room looked exactly the same as it had that morning, but it wasn't the same room anymore. Just hours earlier, my wife, Claire, had walked out. No shouting, no tears, no accusations hurled like knives. She packed a single suitcase, zipped it closed, and left. The sound of that zipper still echoed in my ears, sharp and final, like a verdict being delivered. I tried to remember what she said before she left, but the words blurred together in my mind. All I could clearly recall was the rhythm of her footsteps as she crossed the floor, each step pulling her farther away from me, and from the life we once promised each other. When the front door closed behind her, there was no dramatic slam, just silence. A silence so heavy it pressed down on my chest until breathing felt like work. I stood up slowly and walked toward the fireplace mantel. Our photos were still there, smiling faces, sunlit vacations, birthdays where we leaned into each other, convinced happiness was permanent. I picked one up. My thumb traced the curve of Claire's smile, and a question I'd been avoiding for months finally demanded an answer. When did she stop smiling like that at me? The signs had been there. The quiet dinners where conversation died halfway through. The late nights at work that became routine. The way she started looking through me instead of at me. I told myself it was stress. Told myself love could survive anything if you ignored the cracks long enough. Now those cracks had split my life in two. I wandered into the kitchen, hoping movement might quiet my thoughts. That's when I saw the coffee mugs. 2 of them, side by side on the counter. I had made her coffee that morning, just the way she liked it. I remember thinking maybe a small gesture would soften whatever distance had grown between us. She never touched it. I stared at those mugs for a long moment, then picked them both up and poured the coffee down the sink. The dark liquid disappeared into the drain, swirling away like the last pieces of my marriage. The sound of running water filled the room, and somehow made the house feel even emptier. I sat back down on the couch, elbows on my knees, trying to steady my breathing. My chest felt tight. I wanted to call someone, anyone, just to hear a voice that might tell me this wasn't the end. But I couldn't reach for my phone. What would I even say? I failed? She left? I don't understand how everything fell apart so quietly. I wasn't sure I understood it myself. That's when the doorbell rang. I froze. For half a second, hope surged through me so fast it almost hurt. Claire. She came back. But I crushed the thought immediately. Claire wasn't impulsive. She didn't leave just to make a point. If she walked out, it meant she believed staying would hurt more. I stood, my legs stiff, and moved toward the door. When I opened it, my breath caught. It wasn't my wife standing there. It was her mother, Evelyn. She stood calmly on the porch, wearing a simple cardigan, a small bag resting in her hand. Her face held no anger, only something deeper: concern, strength, quiet resolve. For a moment, I didn't know how to react. I had prepared myself for blame from the world, but not for this. "Michael," she said softly, her voice warm but steady. "May I come in?" I stepped aside without thinking. She entered the house slowly, almost reverently, as if she understood the weight of what had happened within these walls. We sat in the living room, the same room that had felt unbearable just minutes earlier. I tried to speak. Nothing came out. Finally, the words escaped me in a whisper. She's gone. Evelyn nodded. I know, she said gently. She called me before she left. My throat tightened. So, you know she doesn't want this anymore. Evelyn paused, choosing her words carefully. Sometimes, she said, people leave not because they don't care, but because they don't know how to stay. Her words caught me off guard. I had expected anger. Instead, she offered understanding. She's searching for something, Evelyn continued, and it isn't something you could have fixed alone. For the first time that night, the silence in the house didn't feel crushing. Her presence filled the space in a way I hadn't anticipated. She didn't interrogate me, didn't reopen wounds. She simply sat there. And in that stillness, I realized something unsettling. I didn't feel alone anymore. As the minutes passed, I glanced at her and thought I saw something unspoken in her eyes. Something I couldn't name. I dismissed it. My mind was too clouded with pain. Still, one question wouldn't leave me. Why tonight? Why now? Why was Claire's mother sitting with me in the ruins of my marriage? And that's when I realized this wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of something I never saw coming. Evelyn sat with her hands folded in her lap, her posture calm, as if she understood silence could be more healing than words. Couldn't look at her. My gaze bounced from the carpet to the coffee table, anywhere but her face. Finally, she spoke again. Michael, she said softly, I didn't come here to place blame. I came because I know how painful this night is, and I didn't want you to face it alone. Something inside me cracked. I loved her, I said suddenly. I really did. I did everything I knew how to do. Maybe it wasn't enough. Maybe I wasn't enough. My voice broke. I leaned forward, burying my face in my hands. Evelyn moved closer. Don't say that, she said firmly. You gave her love. You gave her stability. You gave her a home. She paused. Sometimes people walk away not because the other person failed, but because they themselves are lost. I lifted my head slowly. Then why does it feel like I lost everything? Because, she replied gently, you gave your whole heart, and when you do that, the absence feels unbearable. She looked at me with steady conviction. But don't let this moment convince you that you are less. Loving deeply is not weakness. It matters. And in that moment, something shifted inside me. After that night, life didn't suddenly get easier. Claire was still gone. The bed was still empty. The house still echoed when I walked through it. But something had changed. Evelyn didn't disappear after that first visit. She became present. First, it was small things. A knock at the door every few days. A warm meal brought over, just in case you hadn't eaten. Short conversations that never felt forced. She never asked questions I wasn't ready to answer. She didn't push. She stayed. And for a man whose world had just collapsed, that mattered more than she could ever know. The days turned into weeks. Grief doesn't move in straight lines. Some mornings I woke up feeling almost normal. Other nights, the loneliness hit so hard I had to sit on the edge of the bed just to breathe. Evelyn noticed everything. She noticed when I stopped shaving, when the house grew messier, when my laugh disappeared again. And every time, she showed up quietly, never announcing herself as a savior, never acting like I was broken. She treated me like I was still whole. One Friday evening, after a long, exhausting day at work, I pulled into my driveway and saw her sitting on the porch. She was holding a casserole dish, balanced carefully in her hands. I thought you might not have eaten, she said with that same gentle smile. Something in my chest loosened. Inside, we ate together at the kitchen table, the same table where Claire and I used to argue in silence. But this time there was warmth. Real warmth. We talked about ordinary things. Her garden, my job, stories from her past. I found myself laughing, genuinely laughing, and the sound surprised me. When was the last time I'd done that? I caught myself watching her as she spoke, noticing the calm in her voice, the patience in her eyes. And that's when the fear crept in, because I realized something dangerous. I wasn't just grateful anymore. I was attached. That night, after dinner, we sat in the living room. The fire crackled softly, filling the silence without demanding attention. "I need to say something," I said suddenly. She looked at me, waiting. "It feels easier talking to you than it ever did with Claire toward the end." The words hung in the air, heavy, honest, terrifying. Evelyn didn't answer. She reached out and placed her hand over mine. Just for a moment. That simple touch carried more comfort than months of empty conversations ever had. But it also carried a line. One neither of us crossed. Not then. Later, when she left that night, I sat alone and faced a truth I didn't want to admit. This wasn't about romance. Not yet. This was about being seen. Evelyn saw me, not as a failed husband, not as a man who wasn't enough, but as someone still worthy of care. And that changed everything. Weeks later, Claire called. Her voice was distant, controlled. She told me she wasn't coming back. There was no anger in me when I heard it, just clarity. After the call, I sat quietly until there was another knock at the door. Evelyn. She already knew. "I'm sorry," she said softly. I nodded. I think I already said goodbye before she left. She studied me for a long moment. Then she said something I'll never forget. "Sometimes," she said, "the end of one love teaches us how to recognize a healthier one." I looked at her, and for the first time I understood. Months passed. Healing isn't dramatic. It's slow, quiet, uneventful. But one afternoon, as we sat together drinking tea, Evelyn said, "Michael, I need to be honest." I felt my heart pound. "I care about you," she continued, "but not in a way that disrespects my daughter. Not in a way that rushes pain. Only in a way that honors growth." Tears filled my eyes. "Me too," I admitted. "And I don't want to cross lines. I just don't want to lose what this has given me." She smiled. "Then don't," she said. "Let it be what it is. Let it be healing." And that's what it became. Not a scandal. Not a betrayal. Not a secret. But a connection built on respect, patience, and timing. Years later, long after Claire had rebuilt her own life, Evelyn and I stood side by side at a small ceremony. No ruse, no guilt, no shadows. Only two people who had found each other not through desire, but through compassion. Here's the truth most people don't want to hear. Love doesn't always come from where you expect. And sometimes the person who helps you survive heartbreak ends up changing your life forever. Not because they replaced someone, but because they reminded you who you were before you were broken. If the story moved you, subscribe. Because the stories here aren't about drama. They're about the quiet moments that change us. And sometimes, they start with goodbye.